on things. But there could have been other people here just to show that it's more than just one community or one board having a discussion. So I came for that reason, and then of course to discuss the merger committee meeting last night. I have to admit I was really struck by what Harry Frank had said at the end of the meeting, the last comments. And for those of you who don't know him, Harry is from Huntington. And Huntington, of course, has had the most attendance at our merger committee meetings and had a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. But the things that stuck out from what Harry said was when he started talking about how Vermont is doing overall and how MMU is doing and how our kids are doing in terms of pretty good scores, high graduation rate, pretty good scores well, not as much regionally, but certainly nationally. A lot to be proud of. But although we graduate over 90% of our students, only 50% of them go on to higher any type of other education. And of those 50%, only 50% of those actually complete their course of study. In the meanwhile, we have a gap that's rising between the wealthy and the poor. We're showing decreasing gains. The boys are falling behind. There are various statistics like this, and I can add to that certainly the number of people on public support is just rising, not decreasing. So things are not exactly perfect if you look at it.
Public support,
SNAP benefits, use of homeless shelters. I mean, within the wider community, when we talk about a gap between the rich and the poor. And what he pointed out was that the kids that are graduating are not prepared for the jobs of the future. So even though we're getting them to graduation, and even though we're doing well on these test scores overall, the students that are not pursuing any further avenues of education are really being left behind. And my fear certainly is that then they contribute to some of those other public support services as things don't work out for them. I found that to be kind of striking. The other thing he pointed out was that successful companies, some of the ones that we often look to for, to show as a benchmark of what's possible out there, whether you're talking about Google or Microsoft, don't have 8 individual boards working independently with a CEO running between them. They have a single board with a single purpose. So he was connecting a bunch of different dots to basically saying that from Huntington, from his perspective, and from his perspective throughout the state, as having been a teacher and having been a principal, he supported the merger. And I found that to be, the way he described it, to be very refreshing, to be interesting, given what we're hearing from Huntington, and kind of motivating. He pointed out that we have a unique opportunity in Vermont with this sort of part. We're rural, we're spread out, but there are places that are more spread out. We have a small population. We have a pretty homogeneous population. We have potential to do so much more if we all pull together to do it. So it was along those lines that he was talking about supporting the merger. I think most of the rest of the discussions that other folks were having had to do with what was not working for them in the articles. It was more like, this isn't working right, this isn't going to be right, and problems with the articles, not looking at the overarching picture and trying to refocus everybody on what the mission is, what we're trying to achieve. So that was what I came to sort of just recap. And Andrew, if there's anything you wanted to say, John, you did too.
Chad, you're a principal of MMU. Does that sound like only 50% of MMU grads on paying for education?
Well, that's a statewide average. Not Mansfield, we have 70, but we don't do. So the last couple of years, it's been between 65 and 70 of Mount Mansfield going on to 2 or 4 year colleges, and that includes the military and trade schools. But we don't do follow-up studies, like we don't know 5 years out, are they still in, do they just do 1 year, do they do 2 years?
Hopefully 5 years out, most of them are still.
A lot of students finish a year or two. I mean, this is anecdotal, but I've had 2 children in the last 5 years who graduated and just looking at their peer groups. There's a number who definitely graduate from college. I mean, we just had the valedictorian of both St. Lawrence and what's the technical school in St. Lawrence?
Clarkson University.
The spring graduation, the 2 valedictorians were, and then the graduates. So we do meet some success, but our students can probably do that.
And the thing is that, you know, there are different statistics and you can always dispute, you know, one number versus another number, but it had more to do with what can we do to get better outcomes, better results together. Are you happy with what's going on right now, given what you've been told, what you know? Can we do a better job altogether? So it was a big discussion. Well, actually, after he said his piece, there was no other further discussion. That was kind of like said everything. But discussion prior to that had been, I think, more focused on the articles. Exactly. You guys can talk more about the issues around here.
Yeah.
And so I also am here to answer any other questions you might have from my perspective, being a Jericho resident, or what I'm seeing. The other part of what I do is because I'm a school nurse at Essex High School and I take care of the Center for Technology, I see a lot of MMU kids over there. And so I have some experience with that whole population. And I do see a lot of kids that are struggling and that come from families with certainly a lot less means than I would hope. I saw one just the other day, and you know, his story was very sad. His older brother was coming to help take care of the younger sibling, so his mom could come get him. The older brother was 23, had several jobs, and now finally had gotten one as a dishwasher and stove. He graduated from MMU. At 23, that was what he was doing. And the student I was looking at desperately needed orthodontia, was probably not going to get it, and was going through the tech program. Sweet, nice, trying hard, but it seemed like a lot of things were stacked against him and against the family. But I see that a lot, and that is the kind of thing that makes me want to do what I can in pre-K through 12 and beyond district to improve those outcomes, to be really focusing on results, to have everybody be looking at what happens back here influences what we end up with there, not break it up into our job ends here, our job starts there.
What's your feel for the Jericho community? Will they vote in favor of the merger, or is it going to be close, or is it going to be against?
They're not talking much about it, and the ones that are for it. I can't get people excited about it in the same way. The subject, when we talk about education, is I want more of what is working, and I want more of what I can't even seem to be able to get. And I joke about it sometimes. I say, they want the education that you would have gotten in, you know, suburbs of DC or Boston, but they want it here with lower taxes and nicer scenery. You know, they want a ton more opportunities than a smaller school can give them. And they want the enrichment, and they want their kids to be able to take 9th grade math in 7th grade if they want, or they want, you know, just every opportunity under the sun, and they want to make sure that it's only these good teachers, and they want to make sure that any teacher that isn't coming up to the mark is, you know, goes away. Those are the kinds of things they talk about. They don't even think about the board. The school board, like, isn't on their radar. If they want something, they go to the principal. And they don't ever even talk to me about stuff. I'm like, hello, I'm a school board member.
That's probably good, because they came to us, we would tell them to go to principal first.
And they get what they need that way. I go around, well, they attempt to get what they need that way. Or they send their kids to private school. And that happens more and more. So I think that they'll be like, okay, does it change anything for me? Not really. They'll be fine with it. I think they'll go for it.
It seems to me that some of the emphasis or scheme and consolidation was lost when it didn't pass the House consolidation bill. So I'm not really sure why it didn't pass. It passed the House, but the Senate it didn't pass. I'm not sure why it didn't pass that to the Senate, but I think some of the incentive to get this done now has been taken away because of that.
There was another group that emerged from that sort of failed situation that's focusing on the finance. And that particular group, I attended their first meeting, and it's pretty clear that you kind of can't just fix one piece of it. And Heidi Spear was really vocal at a lot of the public forums and spoke mostly about why are you bothering us about governance when you can't even get the data straight on how much it costs per pupil, and she was really focusing on the finance piece of it. That meeting was well attended by some pretty high up people. Shaq Smith came there, David Sharp, Tom Pelham, there's somebody from Human Services there. People are very interested in looking for solutions, but I think that the Senate didn't have enough time to fully evaluate what was in front of them. Part of me was almost relieved, I was afraid of what they were going to come up with in those last days of the session, because that could have been even worse in terms of what they could have kept and what they could have left behind. So I think that the momentum is not gone, and from what I heard around that table, there were plenty of people who were proponents for the consolidation. And there were plenty of people who were saying, let's focus on the finance, but as we discussed it, it ended up going back to quality, it ended up going back to teacher contracts, and it ended up going back to governance. Because you kind of can't, all those things are embedded in each other. So there's going to be some impetus, the School Boards Association is going to try to get the Secretary of Education to focus more on what that group needs. And some of the legislators offered to push the Joint Fiscal Office to actually release more information around their accounting and their figures, which seemed like mumbo jumbo to us most of the time. Like magic. They were throwing out numbers about how much it costs to educate a student at Essex High School, and I pointed out the numbers are wrong, and it's because they have to take out that entire group that's tuitioned in from the islands. So if you were to divide it up and say what's your per pupil cost, that's 200 to 300 students they're not counting, so it looks a lot higher. You know, it's just all these things like that. And then we have all these districts that don't operate a school and somehow manage to rack up $28,000 a student. You know, victory, places like that. When you look at it on the Excel spreadsheet, it's just kind of shocking. I think we have to deal with the idea of the tuition caps too. I mean, there's just so many moving parts. But that will be the accountability and education financing group. You can look it up online if you are interested in following where they're headed. But I do think, like Shaq Smith was definitely, he was leaning towards consolidation. So there were a lot of people that wanted it, but didn't have it. What's your sense about London?
Well, it's not my impression. In general, school board issues a great passion inside this room. Diminishes when you get out to the parents of children in the schools. Beyond that, most people don't really care that much. I mean, they kind of are busy with their own lives. So I think for the majority of people, it's not really a hot topic. That's my impression. These people know different people.
I don't remember. I keep trying to talk about it on Facebook, you know, put out different things on Front Porch Forum, but I get like nothing back.
Well, I want to propose to our group that we have a meeting between now and June 16th. You see on the schedule, June 16th is an important date in the timeline of the voluntary merger proposal. I would propose that we invite any member of the committee, and obviously others be an open meeting, but that we restrict the discussion to Underhill residents so that we can have a give and take within the Underhill community and let a community member ask or state any position that they want. It might be that there would be some information that somebody requests that only one of the other members of the committee has or administration, and that would be fine for them to supply that information. But to get the community involved, they need to be allowed to express themselves and to listen to each other and talk to each other. I think that's our best chance of getting an affirmative vote if they can feel comfortable about it. And that's the way I would like to see that you do that. What's your response to that? And if so, what date works for most of us? It might not work for all of us. It's over a couple of weeks.
Can I just offer an idea? I was thinking about a morning breakfast type or morning coffee meeting at the school.
Well, we've had some of those here.
It snows every time.
We've attempted, it'll snow.
Yeah, that's right.
3 times.
I would just say I would come because I'm close by and I could do a morning, that's all. I just thought if that gets you more people in the evening.
Our best turnouts have been in the evening. Don't know whether that's schools or anything.
Are you proposing an actual board meeting or just a conference?
Well, we would have to warn it as a board meeting, but it would be a community discussion about what questions people have, what comments people have, maybe clearing the air, anything. Let us know what kind of legwork we need to be doing to help them understand what's going on.
I wonder if we had a meeting at the library.
I think that's a great idea.
Could you do it once you
don't mean
try to do it with Eric?
No, I mean,
Yeah,
the.
Overall. That's great.
I think it's a good idea. As I said to you last night, I think that the likelihood of getting I think that, I mean, I'd be presuming. It's not a do it and not do it, but I think if our expectation is for a meaningful communication, I think we are better served to know what resources we have to press on with that. Also, we found community schedule for June, but I doubt we'll get many more people.
Well, it may be. Our experience says we don't need to set up a lot of chairs or typical. Although there have been times when we've had fair community representation. Question about the library, which puts the meeting outside of the district. And does that change the nature of limiting it to Underhill discussion?
I think it'd be great. Beyond that time.
It's a topic that concerns not just, I mean, I know that we want to know what our,
Yeah.
but it's a topic that
Really?
we lend in conversation.
It's not a decision which is hard to make. So it's a community issue, whether or not to merge. So it's not anything, whether we vote to merging into one district. Not something which we as a board would vote on.
That's correct.
So in some sense, it's not really a board issue. So that's public board.
However, but I do think we do have to talk about it.
Yeah. I'm saying, but I'm not saying the fact that it's not technically inside the central town district.
And it might be interesting to actually ask the Jericho school board members also. So it's not just our school board, but it's their school board, so it's a collaborative conversation.
And the well.
And
It makes it a different conversation, potentially a different conversation. I think we have a responsibility to the Underhill school community first. I'm willing to have conversations, joint conversations with surrounding school districts. At some point those are probably imperative.
I'm not really sure.
But we haven't had a discussion after the articles have been up to this point and with our community on this.
I'm not really sure it's a first kind of issue. I mean, this is an issue that's dealing with all the communities, all at the same time. Yes, we are the Underhill community school board. It is more likely that if we have a collaborative conversation with the other schools that are in this direction, then we're going to actually do more for the Underhill community also for the community. I'm having a hard time understanding how this is our issue when it's actually all of our issue.
Well, it is all of our issue, but there will be a vote which tallies the voters in the Underhill Town School District. And those people will be voting on whether this building and its students and so forth comes out as a potential part of the overall in school district, or whether it's a standalone independent district, somewhat similar to the way that we have. But it's the Underhill citizens that are going to make that decision for the left or for the right.
I guess
So
it's
is it a majority of the board that wants to have it at the library and announce it as a wide open meeting to all citizens of Chipman East, especially Chipman East at one time? You said yes. Well, is that what you want to do?
Sure.
Anybody else? And you said yes, you wanted to.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm okay with it.
The only concern I have,
Pardon?
the only concern that I have is then when you have the potential that you're gonna have 15 school board members and a couple of community members.
Well, it's a good possibility.
Well, put it on a night, some West can't make it.
or we could just have a representative from each one. I'm not sure that, that depends on whether or not we're boarding it as a meeting or if we're just.
I don't think our views are different on this board, so I think that would be fair.
Yeah, I definitely do too, as many as possible people. What date works for everybody?
I cannot be more.
Okay. We can start, we can start with tomorrow night, although we probably can't get it out. I suspect sometime next week is a better time. So
We need a week to one anyway.
5 days.
I think next one will work.
That's
Oh, they can't go. Can't go to 12.
Ten?
Tenth is a Tuesday, next Tuesday. So, just doing a celebration of Jericho after that, right?
From investing in honors next.
Probably a lot of people.
This is the problem in June.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that week before graduation, if you're looking at getting any of your citizens from high school or something, like Tuesday night, Wednesday night, and Thursday night.
What happened Monday?
Right.
John, how about working the
Monday.
the state board is not meeting in July, so we don't have that same pressure to
Right.
get.
But at the moment, we don't have any other meetings scheduled, so I do think that the idea of having a meeting before the 16th is not a bad idea, but just so everybody knows the point we're discussing.
I think it's a good idea. It's our last reasonable chance to go to the citizens and say, this is what's going on. Here, you can have some impact if you speak up now.
Can I finish my thought? So the thing about the June 16th, it is not quite as urgent as it was before, because the intention for that meeting was to submit it to the state board so they could look at the report for the July meeting. But what we learned last night is they're not having a July meeting.
So this timeline isn't correct.
This timeline is not correct. So at the moment, we don't have any meetings scheduled beyond June 16th for the summer, and so it may still be appropriate to have a meeting before that time. However, it's not quite as urgent as this particular calendar makes it look, because we're not actually going to be able to submit anything for July state board meeting. So we have more time. So presumably we would have till July sometime. We just don't know when.
But is there a merger meeting? Not an each merger meeting scheduled in July?
Not currently, but there is a plan for the next meeting schedule. So we probably have more time then. It doesn't absolutely critically have to be.
So we'll you and Diane, if we don't have a meeting before June 16th, ask that it might be sent to the state board until after we have had our meeting.
We should check and make sure with Michael and John that that's still the plan, that it would not be sent as a final first draft, that it's still a first draft in terms of the articles. Do you think we have more leeway with things like the preamble, the introduction?
Right.
If the articles, other part that's all legally that has to be just so with the lawyer and with the state board.
What did you say, the articles are going to go the 16th, or
No,
are they not going to go?
The part that we have to have approved by the state is the actual articles of agreement, which is,
Right.
is Article 1, Article 2, and so forth. All the stuff beforehand is not required for the state approval. It's the stuff that is for our public documents.
Right. That's okay.
Right.
So what about the articles?
That you can't change the articles?
I didn't know we can.
I thought I heard
Oh,
something
but
that the
the-
lawyer has.
Yeah, the timeline was based on the articles going out on the 16th, or thereabouts, to the lawyer and the Agency of Education, with the idea that after they blessed it, then it would go to the state board for July. A lot of people are actually wanting to change things in the intro and the preamble more than they want to change things in the articles. So we're juggling a lot of people's needs, and that's why I brought up the two different parts. But the articles, I think that's where John's concern is that your community look at the articles. It may, obviously all of it, but that has a little more pressure from my understanding. And I would be happy to confirm that between John and Michael to get you that actual verification.
So the real question is, what is the deadline that the articles will be submitted out of our little unit here to the Agency of Education and the board? And that you back down from that. Right, it sounded like that was back to August. Right, and it was earlier, but there still is a deadline because it has to go to the attorney for vetting, and then it goes to the next one.
And there may be changes from the attorney, in which case we would all have to look at that, because if they change something substantial, we have to know about that.
So the question is, if you have this public meeting at the library, would it make sense to do this in the next few weeks before the 16th, or to have it be later with the understanding that Diane will confirm that that 16th is the drop dead date, if it's a little bit later.
Yeah, having said all this, I'll make this point too. I do think that, going back to my original point about how we move in the fall, I also think in terms of getting more people, we are, even though June is a tricky month, I think we're more likely to keep it out. So I would, if the point is to get people engaged in the conversation, I would be producing that. For that, I would say that our legal responsibilities for getting the articles finished in time are not quite as urgent as this has it on this current schedule, but I do think that our idea to engage people is better. So I would be for that reason.
So we come back to John's question, what's happening on Monday?
I can't do that.
Monday the 9th, that's a policy meeting as well. The Wednesday.
If we can accept that the 16th is no longer an important date of conversation, you can go into that week or the following week.
I would say it's not important. I would say it's not absolutely urgent that we have to discuss it. I think it's important that we talk tonight about what is being discussed. But I think in terms of the public engagement, it's not so vital.
What about 2 dates? One, the 11th, assuming that it has to be done by the 16th. That's the first choice, but if that's not the case, go with Wednesday, the 18th. Oh, that's right, that's right.
The 11th, I think, is Jericho's school board meeting. I would go to that. Anything you submit in writing about concerns about the articles, though, will be brought up in the next meeting, June 16th meeting, if there's something changed. So I know you had some concerns about the articles. My concern is that the public won't read the articles, certainly not at the level that you guys will.
Well, yeah, we can't assume that, but plan for the possibility that there are some citizens that will do it.
The opportunities are being given for that. It's just you can put it out. Here's the next one. The opportunity is not at all.
And again, I say, with the assumption that the 16th is not a date which we should have met before, then that opens us up to each week or two following that. What day of the week is the 16th?
Monday.
So what about that week and available for people? 16.
It's important. Not the day of the meeting. So,
That should work.
No, not the 16th. Because that's, you probably still going to have it. So it can be the 17th, 18th, 19th, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, possibilities.
I believe I'm able to come.
Wednesdays, library, Thursdays, Wednesdays.
Especially when so we got to check about that
Yeah.
too.
Do I have a charge?
Tuesday,
Just
okay? And you said there was a problem at the library on
I don't think it's
Wednesday?
a problem, I just think that it closes early, which means it's available for just as
Do we have to quit early?
No, what I mean is that they oftentimes will have a Wednesday night events because the library closes early. So if they have a Wednesday night event, people ask about the community meeting around Wednesday.
But if it weren't available, we could.
And so we probably should choose 2 days. Last one, if the library is not available, the first one will default to the second one.
Or move it here,
Pardon?
or move the meeting here, not at the library, but here.
Okay.
So that Tuesday is the last day of school, the 17th, and I don't know if that fits into your thinking around who would or would not attend on the last day of school.
I think we're in line to do that next weekend, but
As good as any of them.
I'm looking up the evening schedule of the Deborah Lawson Library and it's blocked. So for some reason, it's going to the blocking, so we'll have to check.
Okay.
So I can't tell you if on the Wednesday Deborah Lawson is available.
So please, Peter, thank you. Try for the library, to both have it here. We still have to take it.
So you want to Tuesday the 17th?
Sounds good.
I'll choose Tuesday.
No, it's there the following.
So the 17th will be.
Is there anything else I can answer before I go and let you guys go on with your meeting? Do you want me, if I had something for you that's specific?
We've been exchanged about, the example I gave at the meeting, it wasn't a good example, so I don't like it to happen, but when I talked about staffing, to fill people in, let's say, for instance, we become one district. Okay, let's say, Jericho is hiring, and they're hiring and they need a reading specialist. I say we're ripping the person we have to rip isn't strong in reading, but is strong in math. For one district, then the person being ripped here will automatically shift over to Jericho, even though it's not a good fit for needs. The way it is currently, we can all do our hiring independently and get our proper person. So that's one of my main concerns about becoming one district. That's a better possibility.
It is, and one of the things that I heard about, it doesn't quite, right now, it's the seniority and its certification. So, and that's through the contract. But in the elementaries, they didn't go from elementary to elementary before, but MMU could move from schools. Is that correct, Jim?
Right, because
I just want to be clear about that part. But it is one single contract. It has been for a long time in terms of how we handle the risks, how we handle seniority. One thing that I heard, I've seen it written, and I'd like to pursue it, I've already asked Michael Marks about it, was up in Calais, they put into their contract that in the case of a RIF, it goes by the seniority and by the certification to go to other schools within the area. However, the board has the right to determine that if there is a candidate with less seniority that has a higher rating on their supervision and evaluation, that they can determine that that individual will stay and the more senior one will go.
I would argue.
I'm just saying it's out there and it's a possibility.
So the reason why I would argue against that, so not everybody would do it on. So they rate 50 million. I find that.
There's a push to try to get merit somewhere into.
I would like to see it written that if we do merge each elementary school and hire an independent, like when it's done.
That's not at all in this article,
So I'm
so,
aware of that.
so you better keep pushing on that. And
It has to
quickly
go
if you
through
really
the
want to.
contract. change from that, we have to go through the contract negotiations through Michael, and through whoever's on negotiations. Because the contract right now does, I think, say, I'd have to look at it again, that that you can't like automatically transfer your seniority from one elementary school to another elementary school.
If I may, the contract reads the school district, it's queued up.
Right.
It goes by school district and then it goes by qualifications. So you have to have both. So between the two middle schools and the high school, people who are, they have a teacher who, like Mike Turner, who's the science teacher at the high school, used to be a draft river. He within the district because the position is cut at draft river when you go to the high school. Someone here, the position is cut, for instance, Nancy Reagan, whose position was cut, although because Matt Lashley's here, that position can't bump someone under Central or Jericho because it's a different school district. But were we one district, that the contract would need to be changed to the negotiation because the contract would stay as it is. So that would be something that to give as feedback for the committee.
But I don't think it would be addressed through the articles, I think it would be addressed through the contract. But I don't know for sure.
John, I've been to several meetings. I mentioned it, I mentioned on emails. I think I've done all that I can. Now, I think if you people think this is a concern, you ought to send out emails or attend the meeting. I think it's a huge concern. I think the personnel is our most valuable part. And the thought of not getting the right person for the job really scares me. So I saw it happen. I saw putting shit in these. It didn't work out well.
And I agree with you that our personnel is our most valuable resource. And I would like to look at that further. I do think, again, that there is something to be said for somehow getting merit/evaluation into the contract. I understand your point about about trying to equalize how evaluations are done. But I do keep a concern about that, a strict seniority or qualification in terms of hiring, mentoring, and retaining qualified personnel, which is our mission. So I will continue the discussion, though. I have not forgotten it because it's also on my mind, but I'm just not sure. Everything I've heard is that belongs in the contract negotiations. It doesn't belong in the articles.
Yeah, it shouldn't be hard to get in the contract because we're just asking for like the maintenance of the status quo, not like the union would be giving up any rights that they currently have because gain in this case. I think it's very important. You know, I can't do this alone.
Like I said, I did agree with you, and I'm continuing to push on it and research on it.
Well, thank you.
What kind of discussion occurred at the committee meeting relative to what was the arrangement?
It hasn't talked much about personnel, except we did talk about the possibility of moving from one to another, but I think you said that it's something that needs to be less negotiation.
I agree with Tony's point that said.
I'm not saying I agree with Tony's point.
No, I mean, but I'm talking about the committee.
I wouldn't say the discussion on that, but we talked about it, but there was no straw poll that we could talk. It was, we have discussed personal movement, but it's also been said that it's probably not the place to discuss it, but it's something that needs to be less negotiation rather than
It just says all existing contracts will remain in effect until they expire,
or negotiation.
right, or until they talk to renegotiation.
Okay, are there things that you want to highlight for us?
Sure. I mean, I think that a big part of the discussion the past several meetings has been about what happens if the town votes no. And there is some language in here, as you pointed out last night, that is rather confusing. I personally feel that whatever we submit to the public ultimately has to make very clear what happens when we vote, meaning it should be very clear what happens if the town votes yes. It should be very clear what happens if the town votes no, but a majority of the other votes yes. And then what happens if the town votes no and the majority vote no. I haven't looked at yours entirely. I think it's something that should be outlined in the articles, but it's also something that upfront I think should probably be included as well. Very clear. This is what you're voting on. Like saying something about what I said last night. There was some discussion last night about the UID issue, about whether or not it should be resolved and how that would it could be resolved, excuse me, and how that would happen. The language that is in the article at the moment, we've been told is not appropriate because it implies that it's a legislative decision. It is. It's not directed. So we'll probably have to look at that. Okay, I'm missing. And the key issues from
The key issues really were, as you said, and they remain, articles around the town that votes no, trying to put in some protections in place. People were concerned about the fairness or unfairness of how the costs would be divvied up in terms of the town that voted no. Right now, it was left rather vague in terms of that would be figured out, and would be managed from the central office, and there's no like proportions or no details given, because what they're looking for still is to not have an SU model. And I think that there's a lot of pushback from Huntington that you still have to have that SU model. And so therefore you do a whole assessment back kind of piece.
the way we have in the articles, and the way that we're required to have in the articles, is that should a town vote no, so for instance, should Huntington vote no, all the other towns vote yes, the Huntington will maintain its own school board plus its own elementary school, but then will remain part of the MMU board as well. And so the umbrella organization that is CESU will, in the sense that it exists within the relationship between those two boards. And then the sharing costs between each one. So it's not very clear because there's a lot that we don't know. So,
Yeah, the desire was to have the one district and have them be sort of this appendix district if you voted no, if any town voted no, as opposed to having under the SU thing. And I think other issues actually that surfaced were a lot of misinformation. People did not understand things like what would, chain of command and facilities, and there were questions around that. And so there were more of those type of issues. A lot of concern still about whether or not the K-4 would be adequately represented, discussed and talked about in any given board meeting. And that's something actually I addressed today. I'm trying to reach out and talk to those members who have issues and sort of clarify, or just bring out in a sort of conversation instead of here's my point, here's what I don't understand, but actually have a conversation about it, which has been a little more effective. And still, like I said, vague about what the lows from Richmond were saying. We were the only people from Richmond, except they wanted a red, not an NUUSD. I think they feel that would just fracture the community further. In terms of actual substantial questions on the articles, John, you had raised one, and Bill Frank had some questions. Yep, but I remember yours being very specific to the articles. Some of the other questions and concerns seem very general. More general, more attitudinal.
In the concerns about K through 4 being represented, part of the matter of personnel that come up about maintaining a consistent community and school, and consistency in numbers and travel people.
One thing that I remember a comment, I think it was from the committee or something, that this is our first and we don't have any models compared to. But there are school districts that are like the one that we're trying to form, that have K-12 and have multiple elementary or schools. So it's not a new idea in that sense. And there's some that aren't very far away from here. And they probably dealt with the same question about moving a teacher from here to there, so opening appears what you do. And could easily learn what kind of things work and what kind of things don't work.
Even with the Burlington's contract, we were very touchy. See what
Okay, let's say Burlington has automatic systems, but doesn't mean we have to do it.
No, you shouldn't look only at one model. There's several of them.
they might actually have something that actually
Yeah.
is better.
It could be, yeah. I don't know Burlington's contract.
I know, but they're all online. So it's all public documents, just worth taking a look at.
Okay. Anything else you want to share? And we're going to see if there are questions or comments from the rest of the board.
I'm interested to know if anybody has questions, concerns. People have a chance to look at the articles.
I have one question that I didn't see addressed in the articles. So who fills vacancies on this new school board, assuming that the merger takes place? And since it's quite confusing about people running for positions on the school board that doesn't exist yet, what if you wind up with only half of the positions filled on November 5th? Who fills the vacancies?
Good question, really much.
I know in some municipalities, just elect board appoints, whereas when there's an absence and a new board, you appoint for that. But that's a really great.
Well, I think the law says that the school boards have to fill those kind of vacancies. And if there's a vacancy on this board, now the school board fills it.
Right.
Whereas, yeah, on the selectmen did.
Right.
But here you have the possibility, you even have the possibility that you might not have a quorum on this new board. What would you do then?
But it seems to me that given the fact that there will be some overlap between when the current boards would cease function and the new one would start, it seems like at least in that interim period, you could have some sort of
This board that still exists would fill the vacancies from under it.
That makes sense to
It
me.
makes no sense.
Right.
This board disappears within a year after.
Yeah, but I'm talking about only the first time.
Well, the
Yeah,
same
subsequent
question applies
years.
5 years down the road.
No, then I would assume that the board would fill vacancies just like we would fill vacancies on our board.
Right? That's
But it's
something.
just after the first election, when that board really isn't in existence.
Yeah, the analogy isn't 100% because we're all residents of Underhill and we fill from Underhill. Whereas this other board is the residents of the 5 different towns filling from one of the towns, the one where the vacancy occurs.
So the
It's
town
a
would
little
still
bit different
be,
situation.
the town would still be entitled to proportional representation. So the new board would have to fill an opening from Underhill with an Underhill resident.
Right, but it would be selected by the resident, the board members that come from the other 4 towns also.
Right, Underhill doesn't have, say, any representatives on it, so this board that consists of people from other towns would select the members from Underhill.
Bolton is the example here.
Yeah,
Yeah, you would have one, and if that one was not there,
So maybe the local board while it exists and then the select board afterwards.
No, and then the said, modified, with full-time vacancies.
Probably. Other questions or comments? As Diane replied, I spoke last night and raised several questions, and I think the questions are probably in the minutes of the meeting that you can look at online, or we can talk separately if you want. Or we can spend time talking about a large part of it was the issue of what happened, what's the vote mean, to vote yes, to vote no. And I propose in the draft that Andrew was first person to review and see where we go from there. If we do. But clearly, as Andrew said, that's a crucial part and needs to be a whole lot clearer than it is.
Yeah.
Well,
And that to me, that was one of the major flaws of the last process we did this, was people not knowing what they were voting for. That became very clear. And so I think, if this vote, or if it happens in November, whether this is something that goes into the articles or something that comes out later, we do need to just compare what every vote is.
well, for it to mean what the vote is about, it has to be in the article. It can't be somebody's opinion off to the side.
Right. But what I'm saying is that I think the technical details are what is crucial for the articles. I think in terms of what I think that what we then present at the beginning, assuming most people are not going to read all the articles, we need something up front that makes it clear.
Don't read the articles that are interested in. That's really the news media may help us out, or it may, as they have in recent past, cause us problems.
They have their own problems.
So we'll have to see. All right, is there anything more to be said on this topic?
No questions. Unless you think I'm missing something about it.
No, I think that John was there, he knows what the conversation was about and where it was coming from, the different quadrants of the concerns and fears, and a lot of that has to be really bridged with either discussion or what I'm hearing is that more people want the preamble and introduction fleshed out to know what they're voting for in more plain language. Thank you all for your time and.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. And Tony, I will get back to you
Thank you.
on stuff that I find out.
Okay.
Welcome down to help.
Thanks. Bye. Yeah.
Thank you.
You can actually, if you need to, you can go outside.
Sure.
Which is the best way. Great. Thank you.
Actually, that way is the best way because it's sitting down.
Yeah, well,
You can see the cloud on the north. Okay, we're back to item number 1. Is that the thing that's called the budget summary?
Year-end estimate.
Yes. It's not the thing that's called the budget summary, or the sheet that's on.
That's what that is, yes. It's one and the same. It's the one pager that has all the summaries of the line item.
2013-14 proposed budget summary and comparison.
Correct. Do you want me to walk through it? Do you want me to know?
Well, let's see what questions there are. If you want to highlight something, please do.
Okay.
You can do that now if you want.
So if you look at the proposed budget summary and comparison, this is as of May 29th. So we still have another month and plus a few days to go. If you look at the instructional programs, you see that we have a supposed surplus, about $14,000, and that is a result of us not being able to hire the Spanish teacher. We've tried and had numerous outreaches to try to reach them. So that's what that number is from. If you look at the special ed, the local, you'll see that we are in a deficit of a slight amount, and that has to do with the the amount that we're being reimbursed from the state, and that has changed based on population and estimates. You look down a little bit further, you will see the 14,000 in the library and technology services, and that is a result of purchasing of our computers and the lease that we are, the way that we're working with the computers is we purchased on through a leasing agreement. And if you look down on the revenue side, you see under local loan proceeds donations, and then you see 19,000, and that offsets. And the numbers aren't exact, but part of that is because of the leasing agreement with the computers. Is that we agree to lease for 3 years and pay them back, but in the first year they pay us, so you see the revenue, and then it comes back. If that makes sense.
Say that, say it again,
So,
please.
the computer's under a lease agreement, and I'm just looking at the Bob gave me. So they give us money to pay for the purchase,
Hey, who?
the computer company. So
Okay.
whatever the company is, and then we pay them
I
back.
want to use the computer that Tony's selling me. I
Right.
go into his store and he gives me some money.
Well, I say, Tony, we're going to do this. We're going to, over 3 years, lease these and then own them. And Tony says, great. In the first year, we'll give you the computers, and you have to pay for them, but we will also give you the money back, and then you'll pay us back over 3 years.
The computer's $1,000.
Right.
He gives me, and that's $330 a year, maybe or something.
Right, right.
How much does he give me?
In the first year, the amount, how Bob described it to me, the leasing agreement, is that they give us the money, the total amount.
$1,000. He gives us $1,000
Right,
before I walk out of the store.
right. And then
How much do I give him?
over the course of the next 3
How much do I
years,
give him when I walk out of the store that first year?
my understanding is the first year we don't give them anything because of the leasing agreement.
So we have the computers and $1,000 is his money.
Yep, and then next year we pay, and the
Pay
next year
the
we pay
300.
30 to 33 cents or whatever a third of that is, and over 3 years we pay it back. I know you're scowling, Tony, and Bob, explain this to me. I said,
No,
explain this to me
I have my
again.
reading glasses on. I'm just trying to.
No, no.
So at the end of 3 years, we paid the $1,000 back, and
Exactly,
we have the computers,
exactly.
and the guy who sold it to us has nothing.
Yeah, he gets his $1,000 back.
He gets his $1,000 back.
Yeah.
That doesn't make
That
sense,
doesn't make
does
any
it?
sense.
It doesn't make sense.
Well,
Let me read
it
my-
makes sense to us. It probably doesn't make sense.
It's a good deal for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not like he
But
gets
he
us the
probably won't be in
computers and then
business for 3 years.
the lease agreement.
So how, this didn't make sense to me
Yeah.
either. What Bob described to me, the leasing company, they give us money to pay for the purchase, and then we pay them back over the next 3 years. And the first payment is more interest, and then we're paying back the amount, and then principal.
Oh, we borrow money from the leasing company.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
That makes more sense.
So that,
Right, so it's not
So we're
Tony, it's
paying-
you who is the
and
bank.
We get to borrow $1,000 from the leasing company, we give it to Tony, the store. He's happy, he's got his money, he can go on. We have the computers, and we have a debt of $1,000
so they make money off
for
you.
3 years.
So, I'm sorry,
Yeah, okay,
does that make sense to you?
yeah, yes.
So that's why that's such a huge number. If you go down to the secretarial services, you'll see what looks like a $7,000 deficit, and that is the result of a defunct copier. And we similarly upgraded to a color copier, and we had a lease agreement. So we bought out the old one, and then we're paying it back. We'll continue to make the lease payments over the next year. And then if you scroll down to the operation and maintenance of plant, that was also a large number, and that is a result of several things. One is an increase in the heat fuel cost. The second, if you recall, that damaged light pole in the parking lot. And then the third are 2 items. One is the research that we did for the architect to do the design for the security upgrade. And then the second was the actual putting in the new doors in the campus. So there's 2 pieces. So those are sort of the outstanding items that don't seem normal. And I have all the details if people have other questions about that. I don't know if you want to have anything.
Any further questions? Anyone else on the comments?
So it looks bad for our expense budget, but the net is only, we're looking at a $2,000 deficit.
And $14.5 million. I think that's And I need to, just thank Barb because she's done a really good job looking into other items in the budget, balancing and not spending to arrive at that number.
We're not expecting anything dramatic in the next month.
Hush.
Hardly. Okay,
We're in good shape.
okay. Ready to move on?
Managing the funds, Bob.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Next year, budget development. As I read this, I thought this was in the administrative report, is that true?
It is. I did write in the administrative report, if you look on the last page, which is about 2/3 of the way through the packet. And it's a page that looks like this, and it says, looking ahead,
Okay,
budget. And these are items that, Barbara sort of combed through the building and spoken with her maintenance folks to see what are the things that we're meeting. And these are items that will influence the budget next year. It can be planned in the development process.
okay, let's look at those and see if there are any surprises, right? We'll talk about the preschool in a second. Okay. What kind of number do you anticipate against the technology?
It's the same or a little bit less. My recollection off the top of my head right now is we had like about $30,000, for the next 3 years. It's a little less than that. Is that your recollection, Vicky?
Yeah,
Steve talking
it was a
around
little
the
less last
$30,000.
year,
Yeah, it's
28 or something.
Yeah,
like
it's a little
that.
less than that, but in round numbers, I think we had a budget going ahead for the next 3 years of about $30,000 to have replacement and continue to move forward with our initiatives.
And
And
that plan
no
still
change
looks
has
like
happened.
it's the right
Yes.
plan for us.
Yes, it does.
Our student population going down. Is that-
Yeah, we might have some adjustments downward because of that, but right now I think we're in good shape.
And the numbers are in your budget, so there's nothing additional.
The sort of separates the going from standards to minimum and then
Yeah, it's the other way around. It's
from a minimum to standards.
yes. So we need to think about how to replace some of the old equipment. How to expect them to simply tell us that those are good for plants, but not good for the world.
Right.
What was that?
Aluminum paints are no longer considered appropriate equipment.
Really?
And ours are going away.
Okay, went through that cycle. But anyhow, okay. Did the door that had a problem, is that the one that got replaced, or is that still?
No, that was the exterior door here at the end that at some point that needs to be replaced.
Yeah, that we had in our safety upgrade.
Correct.
I don't know whether this is the place to do it or not, but I want to talk about whether we want to revisit the safety upgrade code. In my opinion, it's rather likely that we got swamped by tidal wave there, not necessarily by rational voters. At some point this evening, I'd like for us to address the issue of whether we want to bring that up again. Okay. Help me remember. We're okay on the budget development, which is that last page of Jim shows. At this point, we don't see any other significant items that's going to need to be looked at. for the next budget year.
I would say that we are planning another FTE reduction, but we just aware of that as much as we can. So if you could have a, think something about forward.
Already got.
But I think we should put it up there.
And you want any response from anybody on that, or? Okay. We all sympathize with that. Those two down there, probably as much as anybody, but maybe do as much as anybody, I don't know. But,
I just want people to, I don't want you to feel that it's fine.
well, we talked about this, I think Barbara has been strict, rather open and honest with the staff here.
I would, yes, I absolutely would not, but I think with our voters too. I feel like we should do that about it. We can have a vote on it, right?
And I think with the fourth grade class leaving of in the 30s and the kindergarten class coming in the low teens, automatically it's 26. So the numbers don't fit.
You're not saying make a public announcement now, right?
No. It's something that we start to discuss, but be sure that people know what it is.
Okay, we'll bring it up again under the appropriate contract. And tax anticipation note. Is that when you speak to?
Sure, or if you look at I think the fourth and the third page of your packet.
What?
The third page of your packet, you see a memo from Bob, and he goes out to the banks every year, and this is essentially to borrow and or reinvest money from the taxes so that we can pay our bills, which don't land at the same time that the taxes are collected. So sometimes we have to borrow and sometimes we have to reinvest to be able to pay our bills. So we went out to 3 banks, People's, Merchants, and the National Bank of Middlebury. And the cost of borrowing netted with earnings is slightly more favorable at the People's United Bank. However, as the general fund account is at Merchants Bank, which will facilitate cash management, it'll maximize investment earnings, he recommends that the district borrow the money from Merchants Bank at a 1.4% and investment funds at Merchants Bank for 1.6%. And then last year it was awarded to People's United Bank. So that's his recommendation.
Didn't we switch from merchants to People's this year?
We switched to merchants.
Well, for fiscal year 14, this past year, we've been with People's United, and this recommends for next year switching to merchants.
Well, I think we're switching back. I know that the town offices were very happy when we switched, the last time we switched, whoever we switched to, which I assume is People's.
Which, yes, that's good.
So they would not be happy if we switched back to merchants.
I thought they were happier with the merchants.
I don't, I'm not positive which
Yeah, I'm
bank
not
we switched
positive.
from and which bank we switched to, but just,
Does Bob have any communication with the town treasurer?
I don't know that he's spoken with the town treasurer. I do know that having both accounts, the tax accounts and then the general fund account with the same bank, you can maximize your potential earnings on interest that money that is sitting there. And that's one of the reasons he recommended the merchants.
So just one of those will switch to merchants.
Correct. Last year, the TAN was awarded to the People's United. But not last year, this year, fiscal year 14, the year that is ending. The 30th.
so we have to make a decision on this tonight before we look into that a little further as to who did we recently switch from to.
Is it the tax account is at merchants, is that correct?
No, currently, the tax account, if you look at the bottom of this sheet, if you look way at the bottom, it says the tax account for this fiscal year is at People's United. And then if you look at the previous paragraph, it talks about the People's United. However, because the general fund is at Merchants, it makes more sense for the school district to stick with the Merchants. Now, the issue with the town, and I can look back actually through last year's notes, so maybe you can hear. What may be the issue with the town preferring People's United is that the town may use them for their other accounting, whereas the district, the school district uses Merchants. I'm just guessing that that's what it is. This isn't factual, but the feeling here is that you've heard people say that may be the case. So when they're collecting taxes for the fire station and town employees, it's easier for them, whereas the school district is easier for us to go up.
I recall the discussion, the last time we decided to switch banks, was that the bank we were switching to was a much easier bank to work with. That was another reason to do it. Plus, that it was favored by the town hall.
You have a good memory, Peter. I don't remember that. I'm
There's
looking
some way we can postpone this though, so Bob can, maybe have Bob give the town treasurer a call. And we can have a little discussion.
We'll just go back through the minutes and
We do need it by July 1st, I suspect.
Tax anticipation note. These are the minutes from last year. So the minutes July 16th, 2013. So a year ago. Robert presented the bids by People's United Bank and Merchants Bank. TD Bank did not bid for our tax anticipation note. Robert recommended the bid to People's United. A motion was made and seconded to borrow for People's United at a loan rate or investment rate. That's all that it says.
Well, we're supposed to have a meeting on June 17th.
This is the previous years. If I can go back to
We'll just put it on the agenda, one of the meetings.
Yep.
That's the situation. I would feel more comfortable on voting on this after Bob has a chance to call our town treasurer.
Well, I think that, I know that he's really looked into this, and this is his sound advice. Whether he called the town treasurer, I can't say he has, I can't say he hasn't. But this is, from his perspective, based on what's best for the school district, these are his recommendations.
We have to work with the town, so it's not going to change anything. We have time, we have a meeting to put in that.
Can you say it's gonna maximize the funds, and isn't that helpful?
That's correct, yes.
So it does make a big difference in terms of,
Well, I don't see any harm in having a.
What was your point?
well, I mean, if keeping them at two different banks is like cost money, and the point is to maximize the fund, being able to potentially increase the money.
Well, what's the difference in the?
I don't know, that's the
Yeah.
well, it's almost no difference in between, so the net is 0.22% in People's, and it's 0.21% for Merchants.
I'd rather try to, that'd be worth it for such a small difference. Keep a good relationship with town hall. And that's something I think Bob has to have to talk with the treasurer. I would like to move on this.
Okay with everybody? You have a problem with that?
That's whatever you wish. There is a meeting, the 16th is the meeting that we're gonna have at Deborah Rawson, right?
2 weeks.
Okay, so the 16th.
The 16th is the merger committee. And then
So what day will it, so this is the June meeting?
June 7th, meeting where we're planning to meet, we basically have an open forum
Tuesday.
for community members on the.
Okay, so the meeting of the merger, you'd also revisit the tax anticipation.
Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
okay, yeah, I was thinking second meeting. Visit. Okay. So, and my job is to ask Bob to check with the treasurer and then to give him an update on that, so you can make that
Yeah,
decision.
and to ask them, why did we switch to people-related bank payments? And did we switch from merchants to peoples in fiscal year 14? And why are we now switching back?
And I believe that was for financial reasons, but I will ask him two things. One, if he's spoken with the treasurer about their purpose, and then the second is why we switched and I'm not switching back. Anything else?
We haven't spoken, but we're asking.
She's happy with it, so she's seen it.
Okay, next is service bids. Memo from Joanne.
So those are on the next page, I believe. And you can see for the waste removal, you have the two bids from Gothier and Casella. And you can see that Gothier doesn't charge for the recycling and cardboard and composting, whereas Casella, the solid waste, seems to be less than Gothier. But if you look at the total, you see that overall Gothier is less, and they include the recycling in their one price. That makes sense. Which is why she recommends, Joanne, who went and did the estimates, she recommends Gothier.
So it's up $60 from what we're doing this year.
Yes.
No question. This might seem very obvious, but, is the recycling cardboard and composting, do they offer that, or do they just not? Do they just take everything and garbage it out?
A lot of the waste recycling is commingled. So they have the garbage, and then they have the commingled bottles, cans, paper, and that goes in an extra can sorted. And then the composting, they have to by law, is it this year, that all solid waste districts have to do the composting. So
It's separate. Okay. We have compost outside the tenants, we're gonna roll over the stock. So it's separate, okay, from the garbage.
and my understanding is they charge you one price. It's listed under solid waste, but it does all three.
It does, they do,
Okay, let's go along unless somebody wants to vote. Just one at a time. Keep going.
You can see for the fuel oil, Collins, Suburban, and Robinson's Fuels, base overhead and totals. And we didn't receive bids from Patterson. I don't know why Patterson usually gives us a bid, but they didn't this year.
And last year, there was the issue that there was only, we only got the one bid, because all the others said that they can't get. So that is no longer an issue, that's good.
Yeah.
and that's what they do.
Great. It's interesting that FB Collins is sort of like bid, but
And I don't know enough about the competitions or territories or monopoly bids or different oil companies.
it is nice to have that.
So the recommendation is for SB Collins because it's the fixed price, which is the lowest. And then we only got one bid for the snow removal. And it's from John French, and the recommendation is to use.
Which they use this year.
Then entertain a motion.
Okay, so I make a motion that we go with Gothie's bid for waste removal and with SB Collins' bid for fuel oil and John French for snow removal.
Second. Any further discussion? Please vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Passed 5-0. Thank you. Okay. Do you remember some time ago when we met up at, at the high school, I think? The IB group asked us to meet with them and I'm not quite sure who all was there. Yeah. And as an outcome of that discussion, John Albertini wrote a statement. I think all of you got it. It didn't come with our package, if you got it. Otherwise, anybody remember the document? Well, what John wrote was, over the past 2 months, North End elementary districts and the children have been discussing long-range plans and options to optimizing resources, personnel, and facilities. As student enrollment continues to decline and pressure on budgets and taxpayers grow, Underhill Town School District, Underhill Incorporated School District, and Jericho School District want to be positioned to make prudent and thoughtful budget and programming decisions in the event the current school district merger proposal that would unify all or a majority of the school districts that make up Chittenden Supervisory Union is not approved and implemented. North End Elementary discussions are not intended to divert attention from the Supervisory Union merger conversations and planning underway or imply opposition, but are proactive measures to provide students in grades pre-kindergarten through 4 with a high quality and cost-effective educational experience. So I guess our action is that, as a board, and I think this is the first time we've had an opportunity as a board to decide whether we want to be involved with that at this time and in the way that's described.
Is that intended to be like a public announcement in the newspaper or something like that?
It's intended to be public. It is public information. I don't think it has been submitted to any newspaper or anything like that. To remember, one of my points was that to keep this from being something that some will interpret as undermining the merger, it is important that it be publicly announced. I would think that the superintendent might be a good person to announce this, or it could be announced by the ID since they're the initiating group. Are you aware of any action to announce it?
I know that the ID shared it at their last board meeting after you all left. I think the intent of that is to have it available for all board members and meetings, so if someone says, wait a second, I thought the North End, here's our statement. Not necessarily to put out and publish it, because that could confuse people who don't even know that the conversations have been existing, or for the people who know that they've been existing, to be able to say, oh, okay, here's what we're doing. It's not meant to undermine, it's just, if this doesn't happen, here's an alternative.
Are the merger committee members aware of this? Has it been mentioned?
We have not discussed it.
Well, it
It
hasn't been mentioned.
Or it did mention
Yeah, no, maybe we discussed it.
That wasn't read at the last, I believe it was read at the last, not the one yesterday, but 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks and a day ago, I think that was read.
Could very well have been, but I don't recall any in-depth discussion.
Well, yeah, it's not something that they would need to.
It was an
discuss.
FYI.
Right, we could, yeah.
So back to our question, do we want to be involved in this in the way that it's described here? I think we should.
Yeah.
Anybody have reservations or want to talk about it?
So the idea is that the UID and UCS essentially.
Mhm.
And, oh, and Jericho as well.
Probably, you know, probably, you know, that's some vision of the ideal. And not happening that way.
Not part of discussion. One, might be part of the outcome. Two, it limits what the outcome.
Yep. Okay,
So I'm in favor of the discussion. And, you know, if the merger vote fails, and there's no merger to take place, then I think we should look at this and,
yeah, and that indeed is what I read here, and as I recall, that's part of the discussion. Okay, it's all right, I've attended a couple of those discussions. I'll continue as the representative, if that's all right with you. If you want to do otherwise. This too is good.
I'm going to do it. In the past, years ago.
so both of you can look. So that's two representatives.
Okay,
And you can alternate.
okay.
It occurs to me that, if this is the intention that the voluntary version doesn't go through, that makes it that much more important to these conversations.
That's the idea. Yes, that's the idea. To not wait until after November to realize that we should have been given some time for this.
But I mean specifically on the June 17th date. Not that they should be the same conversation, but that the three communities be in conversation. If this doesn't go, if the voluntary merger doesn't happen, those three communities are already in conversation about merging is important to that. So regardless of what happens, it seems like that's important.
It has the high potential of confusing people that will vote in
I'm
the
not
same
suggesting, I'm not suggesting that we both think this is hot, I just noticed that the three-way conversation regardless of what happens, it is going to be an important conversation. So with school boards talking, conversation, but also the community talking is also important for us.
Okay. Okay.
So before we leave that, so we know that most of the ID board seems to be in favor of this. Has the Jericho board had an opportunity to discuss it yet?
They have discussed it and they're in favor of having the conversation. And I think that the initiation of this was a direct result of, we're all doing the second year, we're all looking at their budget and looking at the size of their school. The people in the community of UID have asked, why don't we look at joining these other two if this other thing that happen? But Jericho has this.
So they're in favor of at least starting the discussion. To get a sense from the discussion in Jericho, whether they would, if it actually came to it, whether they'd be in favor of a motion amongst the three elementary.
You know, I was not at the meeting, I just know that they discussed it, and it's a sort of a tricky piece, because involved in that conversation might be the question of potentially closing one of the schools and having the students going to either schools, and we've looked at, the URD board asked us to look at what it would cost of just tuition without even being joined, and then if you take the UID children and tuition in Jericho and Underhill and Central, what that cost would be, and then the question came, well, what if we just merged them and so we didn't have this tuition thing going on, we could just coagulate the funds. So, I think as we think forward, and if our populations continue to decline, it just makes sense for the three towns to say, what will this look like? Reminds me of that.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Okay, so do we need to sort of appoint you two members of a committee to
Are we supposed to appoint 2 or 1?
There's no rules. I'm not aware of rules.
To give you authority, but to talk to the board. Okay. So I would make a motion that John and Tim be appointed our representatives from the discussion, the merger of the three elementary boards in the district.
Any further discussion on this? And vote? On the commission, aye? Aye. All opposed, no? Ayes have it, 5-0. Okay, thank you. 10 and 12 business. It says administrative report. The fun part of it was, how do you want to, first, this seems to be a new format. Looks good to me, but how did we come to the decision of changing the format?
Because there were a lot of items, and putting it on one piece was,
So this might be a temporary.
it's up to you. In the past, I haven't necessarily written the administrative, the superintendent's report, but you had asked for a bunch of stuff and we were both linked to both of us, so we could, yeah.
It looks good to me. Anyone else have a comment? So this is what will be attached to our minutes.
Mhm.
Okay. That's a step up in my opinion.
General projections for total enrollment is going to 120, it's 128, and it was 122.
It's actually up.
It's actually up. We were down as low as 115 at one point this
Oh,
year.
I'm sorry, you're right. Yeah.
We were 115 and 118.
118.
I've registered some new children recently. We've got some that have moved, but I've registered what, 5 new?
Doug's been sitting on the phone for this great school.
Real estate is moving a little bit.
I want to comment on the names showing up. Okay, stop that.
My name's
Yeah, I'm curious about that. You guys mentioned something.
Say that again.
You have an announcement to the general board.
Ooh, thank you for that.
If you ought to be the one
Thank
to
you
mention.
for that
Sorry.
reminder. It's been like, it's like old news for me. You're right. Matt Ginsburg has accepted a position at a charter school in Brooklyn, New York, that you will be leaving. Nancy Regan, who was with, was recalled, and she was accepted the position.
Does that affect her status in any way, seniority or anything?
Well, she moves ahead of Matt.
Pardon?
She moves ahead of Matt, but she's still serving.
Well, she moved ahead of everybody that's not here. Does it affect anything else? So it's like as if she never lost something. Is that
Oh,
correct?
right, yeah, that's right. So it's not like he started
Yes,
with
it's
0
not like,
days.
yes.
So Nancy was registered, Matt wasn't. Matt accepted a new job and Nancy was recalled.
That's correct.
Okay.
Actually, they both received written notices.
Did they?
They did.
Was that a consequence of receiving the letter?
No, it's, whenever we have a budget for fail, we.
No, I know, but what I
Matt,
recognize is that when you get a RIF, then you don't know it's stable, so you know that was a consequence of getting the RIF.
I think we're getting into talking about personnel.
Oh, sorry.
So,
Sorry,
I'm sorry, I don't mean to. do that.
No, thank you for,
Yeah.
thank you for pointing out my mistake.
So did your committee, or the committee ever meet to interview?
Yes, we
Well, we
did.
got a terrific,
We were good.
oh, the one who's up to, I think he's fabulous. In fact, I talked to Heather jokingly and said, you sure you want her to take your class? But when I have a sub, I want someone who can do a competent job, but not stellar. I want them happy to see me back. So, you're right, they're going to love her. She was fabulous in both the interview and in the class. Sorry.
No,
Did
it's
you
great.
hire- Did you hire,
I recommended her to the superintendent.
This is the art teacher we're talking about?
No, there was.
So the placement for
And Kim Octor has been officially fired, and some of the paperwork is all signed and everything. And Kim is a former alumni of UCS and a student of Van Copies. So we're very glad to have Kim back here. Kim Casey Octor.
What's the status of the Spanish teacher?
There are two candidates currently that have applied online, and I have a resume and a cover letter on my desk to call and talk to an individual and see if we can work together.
When we visited the ID annual meeting in Boston, it reminded me of a question I've had in my mind quite a while. Why don't we have posted some Spanish words about things like they do, and I assume a lot of other schools, even without a Spanish teacher, that would
That would
would
be
be
the
helpful.
reason, is because we don't have a Spanish teacher to help guide us with that.
Okay?
So you would be
Once we get that,
You would be depending on me to do that, and my Spanish is very limited because I took Russian when I was in school, so I have very
once we get a Spanish
limited
teacher,
language
we can
ability
get
in
that,
Spanish.
and that will stay on the that'll stay forever. And you can speak some, hola, everybody knows
Exactly,
hola,
we do that, the kids do that.
and some things to help people get familiar. And, anything else on that page of the report anybody wants to talk about? The next page, the preschool legislation, I think we know what's going on there. And anybody wants to say anything there? So the question I had at our meeting in April, I guess it was, and John was, he said you were moving to the district, and his supervisory union was applying for grants. What's the status on that?
It's a $30,000 grant, and we have not heard, we've been given positive smoke signals. So we should hear any day now whether that's been approved.
And what part of that 30,000 would go to Underhill Center?
Probably, well, the money wouldn't go, it would be spots for students and between 6 and 10, depending on the Underhill ID and the Jericho breakout. So that's wonderful, because what that does is it gives you the ADM for those children.
A couple years from now.
So next year you will have half of those children, which is half of 24/6. They're saying they're changing to 25 next year, but so it will help our ADM.
So that's in addition to the 4 that we
Exactly.
have in our budget.
And in addition to the ones who are in preschool and school.
Oh. Okay.
It's good, it's very good. Hopefully, and I'll let you know as soon as we know that.
Okay. Anything else? Another page and another page, I talked about the last page. Are we ready to move on? Are there questions or comments from the administration or from anybody? Okay, we're looking at those bulleted items. Have we covered all 5 of them?
Do you have questions about any of this?
The next item, remember 2 years ago almost, we started Harry Franklin Megaphone, remember that?
Town hall.
At the town hall upstairs, and Andrew put in a lot of sweat. Some others. And I thought we got this completed, but I was reminded, I think, by Peter, the last meeting, that And we possibly never took action on those. So let's take action on those, one way or another. We should not leave things hanging. If there's a valid reason, we can postpone it another time. We shouldn't just let things die in irritation. What's your point?
What action have you taken? I mean,
I think we're at a point to the fork in the road, adopt or permanently say you don't want to continue that. Now, there's a third choice between those two.
Of those two choices, I would prefer to drop further discussion of things.
I agree, I think we will spend a lot of time.
Let's have a motion so that we can do something with it.
So does that mean we're adopting them, or that we're just saying?
And we don't have a motion yet. So what is it?
I'm happy to do it, I just didn't, not quite sure how to word it. What should I?
Well, Robert's rules suggest that the motion should be stated positively so that there's not confusion whether in voting. When you vote yes, it means you adopt, and no means that you refuse to adopt.
So I would move to adopt the, health sector student goal.
Is that the official?
I don't know, the part I'm not sure what that is even said. Was it the right?
I thought that'd be burden with a few things.
Seems like if we can't conduct what they are, then maybe we should. Exactly,
We just need to give it a title.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if anybody has an appropriate title.
I think goals are. So maybe you can define it as you worked on in the past.
And so I move to adopt the UCS Board Meeting over the past 2 years.
Is there a second to that motion? Okay, is there a second? Discussion. Whether we can statement that.
No. I've said enough on goals. I'm ready to vote.
Okay, anybody else want to discuss? Ready to vote? All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. And all opposed, no?
No.
I think it was 4, if you voted, it was 4 to 1. We need to be sure to pay attention to it, which is the big problem with things like that. Sometimes they're steered in the wrong direction, sometimes, most times they're getting ignored.
Well, advise me on how you would like those to be.
I would like them on the Chippewa's website listed as whatever goals, or if there's a better title. That makes sense.
Can you send an electronic version of the last copy? And I
And then include appropriate items. I think would be also appropriate. We do have some things assigned particular dates, those particular months, and those should be part of our calendar as well.
So do you want me at the next meeting, and I don't know if you want to do this in the August meeting or the one on the 17th,
No one to do it on the 17th, that's fine.
bring a draft of the yearly work plan based on the goals, the dates and the goals.
That sounds good.
What was your statement?
So my understanding is in the goals, there are dates to
Yes,
do
there are.
particular pieces. And my question was, you have a yearly work plan,
Yes.
which includes, September building site review, capital plan review, et cetera. And the question is, do you want me, like, in the first meeting of the next fiscal year, to bring the items dated on those goals merged with the current work calendar?
I think so. Yes, please.
Okay.
Anything else on that? The edit list, budget expenses.
I don't see it.
Is that something in the email?
Let's go.
So these are in addition.
$8,000 it says in the email.
The list is, the number is 102,000.
$170.
Okay, we typically had discussions of why the discrepancy, the significant discrepancy. Do you have any comment this time?
No, it's the same as it has been in the past, between when we send these out and when we actually get the work done for this meeting, of course.
And last time we suggested that the second copy of these could be sent out on the meeting date or the night day before or something to help alleviate some of that.
Okay.
Does that still make sense or not?
I recall us talking about it, but I apologize, I don't recall that was something that you wanted to do, but I think I'm having that to it. I apologize.
It's useful to have paper in the hand or something in hand. And then if it's 24 hours or thereabouts ahead of time, seems adequate to me. That's others of the opinion.
I think if it's possible to get us.
So, I'm confused. So we send out the board packet on Thursday, and then you want another financial information on Monday?
Maybe just
Well,
electronic update.
another $100,000 came between the Thursday and the Monday.
That was because of the payroll.
I mean, just do an email update.
Yeah, I'm okay with how it is now. And like, Jen just said, well, we have this additional expense before we move on to retreat.
But yeah, that's simple enough if it's one big expense that's driven it. But oftentimes, at least recently, it's a long list of items. So then, if we don't get to review that long list of items, then why even bother with this list of items? I would prefer to have it updated on Monday by email. So before we come to the school board meeting, I have at least the opportunity to look over the whole invoice request that I'm going to be voting on the next day.
Well, we won't say Monday, but the day before our meeting, by the end of the business day. And if our meeting on Tuesday, that would be Monday afternoon, send it out, is that adequate?
How much
Can that be done?
How much additional burden that can be on the central office?
Well,
Do that.
it depends on where in the month you are. if Monday happens to be the 15th of the month,
Did he come out?
I saw it. I'm sorry.
Miles?
Over the corner of my eyes, I've seen something over there.
Every good library
Yeah, I
should
saw
have
it
a
too.
mouse.
Did you?
Yeah, but I didn't,
I didn't.
what, you just thought it was a mouse?
Yeah, well, I saw the motion. It's the third time I've seen it, and now I actually saw this. But to answer your question, it depends on when in the month we are talking about. If the Monday is the 15th or the 31st or the 30th, or if it's the day that the payroll falls, it can be problematic. And it can, because we're working to get the payroll out and to do that is, but we will do our best.
Since we meet the first Tuesday, the Thursday before is often towards the end, right at the end of the month.
Right.
It might be the first following month.
So I will do my best, and what you all need to do is each meeting, I do my best to make this work. I don't know if, you asked if that will be an undue burden. I don't know the answer to that question. I think that it's added.
You see that difference here. I told you this is just an idea, it's not perfect. You know, we've been trying to reduce burden on our administrators. We aren't one merged district yet, so we're out a lot of nights, so I consider the current system. It's a little easier on you, it makes it a little harder on us, perhaps, but not that much. You always have had answers to our questions. I'll even go further, you always have had acceptable answers.
Well,
When is this generated?
It's usually generated the Wednesday before the board meeting. But if you think about so you have the person who comes and submit an invoice, and then you get the paperwork from here, and then it's like, well, you know, so there's a whole bunch of steps.
So I mean, like the updates, when are the updates generated? Because the Thursday, these are generated on the Thursday. And then the
If you look
updates
at the bottom of that, it should have a date on it. It's just all the way at the bottom and front.
May 28th.
So that's what it's.
well, why don't you see if it can be done? How difficult it is, and I can talk to us about it next time we meet. It's probably September. Do you remember that?
So I have my little checklist, and I'm unclear on what. I'm happy to do whatever you would like. What I first heard was you want an updated invoice edit list on Monday, and now what I think I heard is that you want me to check and see how hard it.
Well, we do that, and you were saying that sometimes, and Tony was sympathizing with that, and sometimes it's an undue burden on the office staff. Get details there and come and talk. If indeed it is a significant burden, come and talk to us about it.
I know that this spring, Stephanie has, because of the 3 budget failures and the having to send out contract and then reduction letters and then new contracts based on all the 3 different schools, that it's a significant number of people in the USD, the 2 middle and high school.
I agree totally with Peter. It's sort of a pretend that we're
Right, you really want to look at it.
looking it over if we have a subsection and we don't know what the subsection is.
So I will do it whenever the meeting is in August, if
I
possible.
suspect we won't meet in August, I don't know, we haven't talked about that.
Okay.
We will have another meeting probably before our lives are over. And if not, it won't matter. All right. Did we approve? I don't know. Okay. Did we have a motion?
What's the grand total?
102,117.
I make a motion to approve the invoice edit list for June 3rd, 2014, and the total amount $102,117.12.
For a second. Ready to vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Passed 5-0. Minutes. Your minutes.
That we approve the minutes of the meeting of April 14th, 14th.
Anybody ready to vote? Okay, everybody ready to vote? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Passed 5-0.
You want to talk about safety update?
Let's do that now. We've made a proposal, we had detailed that we said were finalized, and we wanted to ask the voters for approval, and they said no. Do we want to pursue that further, and if so, how? I think we should.
I do too. I think we have an obligation to bring this to the voters again.
Anybody want to respond to that issue? Should we bring it to the voters again? Yes or no?
As opposed to when we bring it to the vote.
As opposed to any other details, including,
I would want more public.
but should we bring it to the voters again?
I would want more public on that.
Okay? Okay. So, one, two.
So my only concern is that I'm not sure it's right for us to pursue this. It's a capital expense. We're on the verge of a merger. Either way, we're talking about potentially merging the 3 elementary schools or, you know, some kind of kidney system. Should we obligate them to use capital expenses, or should we perhaps wait until that all settles?
My opinion, and it's obviously only my opinion, is that we need to carry out our job to the best of our ability, as long as we have the responsibility to carry out our job.
I agree with that. I mean, my feeling is that as long as, until we know we're merging, we need to. Okay. And so, I think that, I mean, it makes sense what you say. I feel that we should continue to operate.
Are there other considerations that we should be aware of that you know about?
Such as, I'm sorry.
Are there other considerations that we should be aware of in terms of potentially bringing this back to the voters?
I agree with all the different pieces that everyone has said. I mean, more community input, the idea of if we were to merge, what that would mean, the idea of a burden, of a financial burden in the form of a bond. You know, all these pieces are all part of the puzzle. I don't have a strong feeling of doing X, Y, or Z one way or another. I think that
But there's no other consideration, no statement that anybody's made, or no legal thing, nothing that if we make a commitment while we're in the process of this, that the town is somehow stuck with it or anything like that.
No, doesn't the merge district assume all that?
yeah, they assume all that. So we're the SU to merge. We're all the districts to merge into one new city.
They assume all debt in the articles, but this is really a tricky situation because I'm assuming we would bring this to the voters in the town meeting, And then we may very well be a lame duck school board. The merger vote has already taken place. We're not officially resolved until the end of the fiscal year. But could we do that then? Obligate the board that is just forming to a new head?
Well, that's what I was trying to get Jim to give an opinion on.
So as per the articles and as per the advice from the attorney, the board of the new NUSTE is formed the second the vote is made, which is part of the statute. And the reason for that is it becomes an entity, but it doesn't go into supervisory regulatory officialdom until July 1st. And until that time, it is still anything that happens in this district under the guise of this board, which will go to June. So on that, on midnight, so whatever is done prior to the flip of that switch would be June 31st at 11:59:59. And then at 12:01, July 1st, 2015, assuming the NUSTE approved, that would absolve everything that you have done thus far to this new board.
However, this board does not automatically dissolve at July 1st.
Right.
It has the responsibility of carrying out necessary things that the other board might not do. So we don't automatically disappear. We have up to a year, is that correct? We don't have, much of our authority will have gone away.
You may be right, that's not how I understand it, but I could be wrong.
No, that's in the article.
It is, okay.
But there is the implication that once the merged district is formed, that merged district does take on all financial responsibilities. And so, like, they would be building the new budget for the current school year. And so, I hadn't even thought about this. Would they then be, what does happen with bonds then? And I don't know the answer to that.
Bonds is part of the budget that they pick up.
But any new bonds?
Existing bonds.
Could we,
Right, so what
I
you're
don't
saying-
even know. Can we create a new bond?
If it's approved in November, any time, in my opinion, any time before July 1, June 31st. That's a debt that we have made, and they have committed to pick up that debt. Now, that needs to be checked out. I mean, somebody, maybe a legal statement, I don't know. But if we don't, we can put it as a question and say, we can move on, assuming that the answer is that we can do that.
Yeah.
And if we find out that there is a major roadblock, then we'll react to the major roadblock.
There are three pieces. One is what to do about the bond and the borrowing in light of a new seat and merger. The second piece is what does the community feel about the actual security upgrades that were proposed. And the third piece is we've gotten a proposal, but there's a statute of limitations. Were we to reconsider it, we just cannot put the same numbers forward because of inflation and supplies and materials.
Right, we have to do some.
That number will change. And on the second item, I have had people say to me, just sort of passive, just over wherever I can see them. It hasn't been a lot, but have given me the feedback of that the proposal was way too much given the size and nature of the school and that the new lock facility makes sense to me. That's the only feedback that I've gotten around the specific activity and decisions around the facility.
So could we do this? So we'll know early in November if this merger is not happening. If it's not going to happen, then can we move forward on the bond?
No, because then we're in a situation now we're going to be in a big hurry to try to bring to the voters a vote on merging just the 3 elementary school boards. And you got the same situation. So you're going to obligate that new school board with a debt. It doesn't seem right. We'd be saying after we decided that
Like passing legislation.
the ID board, they were talking about if the merger fails in November, they want to bring to the voters a vote on the elementary school board mergers like in December, so that that new board has time to prepare a hurry-up budget for the voters. You know, so
I understand your point.
you know, how would we handle that again? Would we be definitely the people in Underhill would be voting on an addition to the school that the people of Jericho are going to be paying for.
It's just one little point, I think, when we meet with representatives from the IB of Jericho, emerges as just one possibility we're talking about.
Okay.
That's the only, that was the only thing that they were talking about.
But there are
Other
other
possibilities.
possibilities.
The idea we're talking about, we're closing down. So that's another possibility.
Well, this is the mechanism for them to close down. If the three boards merge.
Or to just close, keep the district. I mean, there are other possibilities besides having all three places, all three districts merged.
I'm not in favor of it. I'm not in favor of arrangements. I think there are too many complications as it stands. I think if there is a merged district and there is a consideration for the school being the school that stays open. Then if the districts did merge and IB did dissolve, then whatever we did would be to the benefit. But I think putting all of this forward at this point is, I think it's pushing the community in too many different directions.
I agree with you. I think that's what happened to our detriment at the World Town meeting. I think I have a feeling if we didn't have this bond, our budget would have passed. First time.
I don't think that's true.
Well, we have a different opinion there.
Sorry.
But because I know when I say that, a number of people said to me, I didn't like the bond. I would have held the bond. It took me negative mood. I would have known everything. So that's why. But in the year, things will be a lot clearer. And are there things we can do to upgrade the safety of the school without doing a full-fledged plan? And we've done some. But what else can we do that doesn't involve moving like the principal walk and all that?
I think that's something we have to look at and get back to.
Yeah.
No, I'm strongly in favor of the safety upgrades, but I think there's just too many things up in the air right now for us to bring it back to the voters in March. All this mergers, questions around the table, and I just as well wait until we find out how all the settings are.
Okay. Committee meeting updates. I think we've already covered the merger.
Just finish the, no, we agreed to table the matter.
Yeah.
Indefinitely, as I read the statement.
Yeah.
Not necessarily on the next agenda. The executive didn't meet, policy.
Well, there was one meeting, the executive committee. So the one.
Oh, that's right, there was a meeting.
I went to a 5-minute meeting that was just to approve our accepting state money, is that right? For
Our federal and consolidated grants, they changed the deadline for the grants, and in order for us to be able to accept grant money from the federal government, we have to have our board approve it. But the grant was due before we wanted to approve it, so we had to do it earlier. They changed the date on it.
easiest meeting I've ever done.
Paul, do you not have a meeting? And Monday, I believe.
Okay. Our next meeting date is the 17th. And beyond that, our next regularly scheduled meeting, I believe is September, correct?
What is that calendar? Maybe that's it. Maybe it's-
And so for that meeting on the 17th, there's two items. One is the voluntary merger, and then the second one is
That's
the tax anticipation.
And so you'll have to see that the warning gets sent out.
Mhm.
Thank you.
And do you want me to check with Deborah, you want me to check with Deborah Ross and to see if that's available? to
That'd be
do?
good. I think that'd be good.
And if not, we'll schedule it here.
Yeah. And let me know what else. Send out a front form. Okay, in the back, is there any need for an executive session? Anybody know about? Okay. Keep it going.
Second.
third.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
All in favor, say bye.
All in favor, say aye. Yeah, hey, thank you.
This is beautiful.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe.